Good morning. Thank you for being here. Amy, thank you for having us, and a big happy birthday. Yes, we're the founders of Beautifully Equipped. I'm Jen. This is Kate. And Jen, our fourth founder, couldn't be here today, Jackie Corcoran. Before we dive into Beautifully Equipped, or this talk today, Give, Give, Receive, we wanted to share a little bit about the evolution of how we got here. So I'm going to take a trip down memory lane, jump in the time machine about 3 years ago. We had all met once or twice, really liked where each other was going with their business, and the common denominator was each one of us was looking for personal or professional growth, and really more so in the professional space, whether it was building a business, shifting gears within a certain type of profession. And Kate, our brilliant Kate, had the idea to instigate a mastermind group. And if you're not familiar with what a mastermind group is, it's basically peer-to-peer mentoring. A group of people get together, meet twice a month, once a month. We did both. But each meeting, you show up with challenges, goals, whatever it is that you're working towards. And as a group, we collaboratively brainstorm, problem solve. Because we came from different backgrounds, it was great because we could get information from each other that was outside of our own way of thinking, get out of our minds, and then really feel like you could tackle whatever it was you were going after. So the accountability piece was big. Fast forward, a year ago, we had realized that in our mastermind groups and in the way we wanted to grow our business, there was this constant undertone of how do we get in the online space? Whether it was creating a course, creating videos, and as much as we were keeping each other accountable, it's a little scary. Put yourself out there for the World Wide Web. How do you do it? I don't know. I probably have the biggest resistance to it. And Kate said, you know what? We have been collaborating for 2 years. We have gotten so much out of the way we are growing and changing. Let's do a podcast and let's open this up to the world. Let's share what we have learned. Let's give other people resources. And hence, the podcast was born. January 5th, 2017. It did take us 9 months to get it actually live, but here it is. And so with that, give, give, receive.
One of the things I am learning, I did not memorize everything, so I apologize. Well, actually, I don't apologize. I'm learning it. I am not a professional speaker. So when we talk about give, give, receive, I was just going to start with masterminding, and Jen's given a brief introduction to what masterminding is. So at the beginning of most endeavors, creative or otherwise, you can make a project or a business flourish by contributing more than you are consuming. When we first came together to form the mastermind group, we contributed to creating the guidelines for the mastermind and how it would function, and we gave more than we're receiving was integral to the development of how we wanted to do the mastermind together. So basically, for those of you who don't know exactly what a mastermind is, and to kind of bounce off of what Jen's already said, how we defined it was a mastermind combines brainstorming, peer-to-peer mentoring, accountability, education, and support in a group setting to help you develop your business and personal skills. The group can help with creative solutions, lateral thinking, and decision making. And then members challenge each other to set significant goals, and more importantly, to accomplish them. Because accountability for our goals is a major asset towards masterminding and why you would want to do it. So basically, there's tons of ways you can run a mastermind group, and we're not saying that there's any wrong way. The way that we approached it was that we wanted it to be collaborative within the group, and that's where Give, Give, Receive came in. So you can come to the group, of course, and take what you need and walk away, and your day is your own. How we chose to do it, though, was not optimizing the self for the short-term gain, because that doesn't benefit anyone in the long term. So basically, we come to the group lending different consciousness or expertise to the forum, and so that input will help inform what we're receiving back. And so basically, if you're all contributing more than you're receiving, it also bolsters the quality of the information or the knowledge or the skills that you're receiving in return. It'll be more well-informed, more well-rounded, and the rough edges of your personal perspective will be rounded out by the multiple perspectives of those other people that are contributing to that mass and to that consciousness.
Yeah. And I'm going to talk about about just how give, receive has shown up within our business and how we're working with one another. It's been really pretty neat to see how 4 women have come together that we've been working mostly independent and now having to collaborate on every decision that's being made within a business. And so when we talk about the give, receive, that really shows up throughout our business decisions. And what we mean by that is giving the flexibility to others in which, for example, like when we're taking our emails and creating that, I have to be flexible with what I have first put out as the skeleton in order to receive then the feedback from the other gals to make it a stronger final product. And giving authority to others for them to give me the feedback so that we can take that product and make it stronger for our audience. But then, in addition, giving communication, with the whole creative process. It's a hard thing to do, when you've been so accustomed to making decisions on your own and having to run things past 3 other individuals on a daily basis. You go from feeling like you're equipped to make these decisions on your own and then having to collaborate on everything. So I think that that's been something that we've continued to learn, how to make that more effective, how we can communicate in a way in which it's received in a manner that we know is productive, but it's something that we've all had to get accustomed with, just based upon being really independent women running our own gigs up until really this point. And then, just the receiving the peer mentoring, and it makes for a stronger outcome. So when you know and you keep that in the back of your mind, it's so much easier to receive the feedback to know that ultimately this is because it will be a better product.
And I don't think we realized we were even doing this. This is something that's come up recently. It was something that we carried over from our mastermind group and learning how to communicate, which has changed the way we all communicate with the people we work with differently, which has been, you don't think that's going to happen, but communication is tough. And so really recently we realized, holy cow, we were doing this thing with the mastermind, and now because of the strengths and the skills we learned, we're now able to do that with a business and help develop it.
And to have 4 minds come together to work as smoothly as we have throughout this whole process, I feel like it's because of the effective communication and really building that strong foundation amongst the 4 of us from the get-go with the mastermind. That's really been the component that's made this a strong communication within the group. It's been pretty neat.
And I think when that's forgotten as well, I think that that's something that we constantly bring back to and reset and reframe. So when it hasn't been completely wonderfully smooth sailing and it's all roses. There have been moments definitely where we're tripping up a bit and we're more
no
lost.
shitstorms yet.
but basically, I think that what happens is that once we realize what's going wrong, why aren't things moving forward, or what's happening that we're all of a sudden not really gelling, we just reset and say, okay, who's not listening, why aren't we listening, and what's the reason behind it? And then we just try to reset with that. And I think that that's how we came up with, not necessarily, we didn't sit down and plan, give, receive. We just started noticing a pattern in all the things that we were doing, whether it was from the mastermind to the business, to the content that we're creating, to the social media strategy, that a lot of things that we started doing, we had to say, all of us are contributing something. What is it that you're putting into the pot, and how can we make that grow? How can other minds inform that information to either make it bigger, push it faster, or move it in a different direction? And that applies to communication as well. Because I think that that's what if we start holding back and we're afraid to say, no, Jen, I actually don't agree with you, then that's when we can start having problems. And it's kind of a weird radical candor thing that we've started doing. Well, it's not weird, I think it actually should be supported more. Is that when we do have issues or problems with what is happening or the direction things are going, we've tried to figure out ways where we can deliberate and still be respectful, where people can be heard, but even if their choice or their decision or their idea isn't being moved forward with, we've deliberated enough that they feel heard. And so that's the giving part. And then all of us can move forward, not with that bad feeling of I'm being shut out of group, I'm not being listened to. So.
And in return, you receive immense growth. You know, you're collaborating to make something stronger.
So, and again, same thread goes along with building the content. So it's a very similar process. The whole point of give, give, receive is that instead of meeting in a coffee house space with just the 4 of us in a mastermind group, we were sharing with the public. And so that was scary. How do you share at that scale? How do you share at that level? There is a point where all of us as well had to address how much self-disclosure are each of us comfortable with offering. And so part of what we tried to do when we were developing content was, what are the questions we have? What are the knowledge that we can offer? And as well, what are the curiosities that we have? What don't we know, and how can other people lend their consciousness to us? And how can we be open about it? We don't want to make something that's all about lifestyle design, saying that we know all the answers, that we're perfect, that we're doing everything right. We don't mind if our mistakes are shown, because showing our mistakes as well as showing our successes is part of what we want to give. And part of what we receive in return is the growth mechanism from it. It is learning the things that we're afraid of, the things that we're confronting. And so I think that what we have to come to on an individual basis, which you wouldn't see in the content, is first we have to deliberate what is our self-disclosure level and what is our comfort with that. But going beyond that, from what we do offer to the audience, then it would then jump towards giving of ourselves and the fact that the podcast itself is free and all the resources that accompany it are free resources. And so we want to aggregate and compile this information, whether it's from resources whom we've interviewed or things that we have brought to the table as far as our skills or our expertise. And we want to offer that in a way that can start offering to our audience that value and that benefit, that maybe they will start taking part of the conversation. Maybe they will also start saying, here's some gaps in my knowledge, or here's some consciousness that I can lend to you. And then hopefully that dialogue is what we can receive from that. Is that if we give of ourselves in that manner, hopefully our audience will do the same in return.
Or in starting their own mastermind. A lot of the resources, if you haven't been to the website, they are downloadables on how to implement really from beginning to launch of your own mastermind. So we just believe so much in the value that we've experienced from that, and wanting to be able to give that content to individuals so that they can go out and start their own groups with a strong foundation, and somewhat duplicate or assimilate what we have created.
Building on what Kate said, one of our goals with this podcast and working with a lot of female entrepreneurs is to shake some of the mold that we're supposed to fit into. So as Kate was talking about, how much of ourselves are we going to give up? How much are we going to talk about struggle? How much are we going to talk about, we're all out there trying to build a business or be professionals, but how do you balance that with personal life? And what are the things that come up? And really, how do you address those things? And so for podcasts, a lot of times people listen and continue to listen because they like the personality and the content. And so in that, we have to be who we are. We have to be real. And boy, that's scary in the world of online. Anybody can reach anything. And so we're really trying to push it, to take it to the next level, to let the world know that we don't need to fit these molds, and that and giving some examples, hopefully our audience receives some permission to engage and be themselves.
Well, and being vulnerable, there's one episode where I text my sister and I said, so I'm about to share something on the podcast that you don't know yet. I hope you still love me and that you're not so disappointed. The only reason why I didn't share it was because I didn't want you to feel disappointed in me. And she's like, well, now I can't wait to listen to the episode. And then she listened and she called me right after and she was crying. She's like, I'm so sorry that you felt like you couldn't share that with me, but that's the level of vulnerability that we're getting to, because I think it's so important that we give people the real, authentic self, especially with, and we're going to tap into social here in a second, but there's so much that's broadcast that's like the perfect you, whatever, like here's me at my best, and it's exhausting. Like we have felt like we need to stay true to the authentic, like what's the real stuff going on, and being vulnerable and sharing that, like how do you overcome, not just being like a woe is me, but this is what happened, this is what I learned, this is how I move forward, and we want to help others so that they don't duplicate those mistakes, or they can learn from what we've done. But
So with that, we're talking about giving and receive, we're talking about the podcast mastermind, but we still, at the end of the day, have a business that we need to grow, and everything around the business is free. So it's really a long end game before you start making money at this, and we won't go into that today, but if anybody has questions, we're happy to talk about what that looks like. But in order to eventually do that, we need listeners, we need people to engage, we need our email list to grow. And as we've looked at this, and as we talked about our content, there's free downloads, and you can, of course, you are required to give us your email for that, but we promise we won't get all spammy on you. So in the social space, because there are so many people interacting there, we've taken this same give, receive. And in my regular job, I do marketing strategy, and I've been sharing this with clients, which has been really helpful for them too. And if any of you are working on a business or in the social space, go ahead and take it. So just as with a podcast, people want to connect to who you are, and they want to hear personal stuff. We have to take that same technique and idea into the social space. People want, they're wanting to get a glimpse into who are these podcasters and what do they have opinions about that are not being shared on the audio piece. So it's so hard to do that with yourself in social media. Try to make things personal, share photos of yourself, but we're working on it. So we're working on pushing that give piece there. Again, the resources are there. Not only do we have the downloads on site, but we try to always make sure that we have some sort of article that we link to or something that builds on that week's topic. And in return, hopefully, we do receive engagement. But the reason this is important for businesses is because people are not on social media to have you sell them stuff. They don't want to be sold. So there is a certain point where you can start asking for stuff, the sales, or please do this, or engage with me, but you need to give first. And there's a good rule of thumb, give actually 3 times and then ask. So it's a good technique to use when you're growing a business, when you're promoting it in social, and communicate.
Yeah, we just really wanted to open up to questions as far as
So we were just going to open it up for questions, and we're so thankful for the opportunity to come and present. So
what are all your backgrounds? I know you're marketing and what about you?
I'm an artist, and so I usually work in writing and lens-based media and audio. And I usually teach post-production, digital post-production at MSU.
And then I've been in the financial world for 10 plus years. Just left, was with the private bank at Wells Fargo, and now my husband and I have our own business doing financial advisory.
It's good combo of
Yeah.
backgrounds. So you kind of
Pretty
balance
diverse.
it. Yeah, very diverse. You're not
Yeah.
all in the same industry.
No, it's great. We've actually, because we do have jobs, and podcast is pretty time consuming, the recording, the creating content, and everything else that goes along with it, we've been able to divvy up the roles because of our backgrounds. Kate does all of our editing and recording. She's like our audio guru over there. Jen keeps us really on track with how are we going to meet goals so we can make money. And I'm over here, looking at the branding and the marketing and how frequent things are going out and what's happening. So it's been fun.
What about, you said there's 4 of you though. What's
Yes.
the other person? What's her background?
Jackie has a background in health and culture consulting.
Oh.
And so she has been supporting us with like social media. She was doing the emails, and then that kind of has shifted a little bit. So
She's also helped bring a different perspective to personal growth and business growth and getting your mindset to be where it needs to be, maybe in the business that you're working for or working in. How do you make culture changes so it works for your mental space? So it's been really fun to play off of each other.
And it's how also to start the business as well, because I think that she set up these parameters as far as, you can develop a strategic plan or a mission, and it can be completely devoid of the personalities that are within the group. And so she really kind of kept us on track for what are the goalposts, what are our purposes, and why we're even doing it as individuals, then as a group collective. And so she kind of keeps the culture engine driving.
What have you guys learned about creating a podcast? Because I hear a lot, in the marketing world, I hear a lot, oh, I'm gonna start a podcast, or hey, you, business owner, get your name out there, start a podcast. And I would imagine there is a ton of work behind it. So what have you learned that someone who says, hey, I'm gonna start a podcast, where do I start? What would be helpful for them to know?
Maybe that's a loaded question.
Yeah, it depends on first know what you are getting into when you're starting, know what you want to offer, and know how fine polished you want it. You don't have to start, you don't have to start perfectly. And I know that what we've done is we've not started perfectly, and I'm okay with that because we're learning as we go, and that's part of what we wanted to do when we started it, is make it like this incubator where all of us can make mistakes and learn as we go, and that's okay. And also, any amount of time that you think it's going to take, triple it or quadruple it, because I know that when we did start, we started talking in January of 2017, and we initially said we're launching in April. In my head, which I didn't tell the ladies, I'm like, yeah, that's October. And I just kept that in my mind because from the editing perspective, I used to be a videographer and I used to edit video, and so I know how much time it takes. I have never been an audio editor. So for me, I'm like, I have a huge learning curve right now, so I need that time. And we also need time to get familiar with the beast that is this, the microphone, which is really scary because it puts yourself out there in a different way than social media. It's really a part of who you are. So anyone that's trying to start, I guess I would say, consider the frequency. Does it need to be weekly? That's what we decided because we had a team working around it. Do what you're capable of, but know that if you're planning on something that you can eke out 5 hours of your working week to devote to a podcast, take that and say, you think it's going to take 5 hours to produce one show, but it'll probably take 15 to 20. So know then going forward, either build it up 3 months in advance so you can release weekly or the schedule that you want. And, so I think that there's a lot of planning involved, and if you want to do it off the cuff, there's nothing wrong with that, but doing it off the cuff, you probably won't get followers because that followers need that frequency and consistency to know that they can rely on when they can hear your voice.
One thing that Kate had recommended, and I'm so thankful that she did, because we were like, well, let's just do the damn thing. And she's like, well, no, we need at least, it was 12 episodes, was it 8 or 12?
12, yeah.
12. So we had 12 banked before we launched, which total game changer. So thanks to Kate, because it's been huge. I mean, so now when we're thinking about what we're creating, we're out basically past summer with what we're creating right now, which is like, it just feels really good.
Which, Kate mentioned, 15 hours a week, that's per person. So each of us are really carving out a lot of extra time, and if we work this far in advance, the stuff we have to do weekly anyway, the stuff we get to do weekly, it's still very time consuming. So, Amy, I'm glad you asked that question. We've talked to a few people who have said, yeah, I'm ready to start a podcast, I have a lot to say, and I don't want to discourage them, but I want them to be realistic about the time commitment.
How do you make the podcast feel current when you're recording for August? My life, it changes shockingly fast to me, and so it seems like it would be hard for 4 of you to be like, oh, we're talking in August now, so we shouldn't talk about the snow on the ground or how we got to the venue and almost ran into a car or something, little things that you add to add your personality.
Yeah,
grow it.
Well, because we're talking in real time then. So we're experiencing and recording as it's happening.
So you don't try to make it seem current when it's being listened to.
No, because it's the topics that we cover are things in which are always relevant. You know, we aren't giving weather reports, or we're not talking about things that, and there may be comments about snow on the ground or something, but I don't think they're enough to draw away from the actual content within. But
Well, we do, it's a good question, because we do think about when it's actually going to air and what might be relevant around that time. But most of our stories are something that has already happened. So if I'm talking, like, there's one episode where I talk about a $50,000 mistake, and still really painful to say out loud. Yeah, that's a big one. But I'm talking about it as what happened and what I experienced, and it's a real example of, you know, fail and get back up again. And so a lot of the conversation isn't so much relevant to the physical makeup of what's happening right now. But that's a great question, because we do have to think about it. And we, trying to grow listeners, are trying to curb how much Bozeman is mentioned, because if you live in Chicago or Florida, Bozeman doesn't mean anything to you.
The other thing too is that from tracks that we have laid through almost the summer, and then for what we storyboard through August. And so we let that shift around as things change. But as well, being that far in advance gives us the flexibility that, like recently we interviewed a dancer who launched a show on Netflix on January 1st. And basically, we didn't interview her until, I think, early December. But since we were so far in advance, we could shift things around and time it so it released at the same time as her launch on Netflix. And so being that far in advance gives us flexibility to move around a little bit, but we do try to keep out any particular details that are relevant to that specific day. And sometimes we have left it in there because our show is episodic, which means that you don't have to follow in any order. And so since we're episodic, it gives us a little bit more flexibility as well. So most people don't listen in any order. So, sorry, you had a question.
Yeah, can you talk about your audience, like tactically, how you thought about getting your first listener, what your expectations were, how you grow it, any data you can share about what your expectations are?
Yeah, sure. Because we come from a broad background, we were having a hard time narrowing this down, right? I have expertise in marketing, and I know a bunch of people who would want to know about certain techniques, and Jackie, who can't be here, culture coach, she has, you know, all of these things that she wants to share. So what we realized going into it, and a marketer will always tell you, narrow your audience before you do anything. You cannot be everything to everyone. And we were like, well, we're going to cast a wide net, we're going to see what happens. So we really, when we kicked off, we really utilized the resources and the people that we already knew who might be looking for professional growth. We didn't really put an age range cap on it. We just started talking to as many female entrepreneurs as the was, because we're females, or female professionals in any space. And we just started to spread the word based on relationships and conversations. And
the email campaign was helpful.
yeah, and we did do a 8-week teaser email campaign where we sent 3 emails staged specifically with little nuggets of what's coming each time that was new. And so that generated a lot of buzz too. And from there, we've just been kind of testing what's working, what's sticking around, what the analytics are saying, what the insights are saying on Facebook. So it's been a little bit of a challenge, and we still have, I think, a lot of work to do.
But I think we've had impressive, because the stat, and this was a little bit of a dated stat, I think it was like 2015, that they, and I can't remember the source.
Libsyn Liberated Syndicate is one of the oldest, it is actually the oldest podcast hosting forum. So Libsyn had an article that said that the average download for new podcasts that are non-celebrity, which we qualify, is 150 per episode. And I think we've been averaging about 2 to 230. So,
which is, you know, in some stats, I think a year before that, where you're lucky if you're brand new and you don't have celebrity status, you're lucky if you get 100 downloads in a month. And so in the first 3 months, we hit a 2,000 download mark. So we're excited. We're hoping it keeps growing.
But in the Chronicle did an article about us. We saw some substantial jumps after that, and that was exciting. And I think it's cool to see the first episode, I think, is over 400 downloads, so people keep on, that was, they're checking that out, and, the numbers are growing. It's steady growth, but we're rolling out a campaign too where we really want to unite women across the country that are doing rad things. And so we've had people just nominate other women in different states and tag them on social, or so that we can reach out to them and figure out who might be a good fit, because we really want to try to do an interview with an entrepreneur per state in 2018. So,
And I think, Jen, you bring up a good point as well. I think another factor that has really helped growth has been influencer marketing. So basically, we've done a few interviews, and we are starting to get more involved with looking at other podcasts and looking at other blogs where we can try to start featuring, and we've been featuring some interviews that we have coming up are featuring bloggers. And so we're trying to get seen on that front because they have already built an audience. And so influencer is actually what in the next few months is what's going to drive things in the future. In the next months.
Lauren?
How did you guys settle on podcast for the format that you communicated to? Was it the way that you wanted to communicate to people, or was it the way that you thought people would receive information best?
God, that's a really good question. I don't, how it...
One, because I'm terrified of video, and we're not doing vlogs. That's
No vlogging.
It was a mastermind, actually, it was a mastermind meeting, and we were all sitting around talking, and one person said, I want to start a vlog. One person said, I want to start a vlog. And then I've been thinking about podcasts for a while because I'm a little bit obsessed with podcasts. And as well, I think probably what lends to, I am obsessed, I love audio, I love tech. I really, really love equipment, and I was in this weird place where I was just obsessed with microphones, and I know it's a weird thing, but I was just obsessed with the components of microphones at that time, and sound always amazes me. So I think I just threw that out in a selfish pitch, to be completely honest. I was like, then I can play with microphones all day, and there's an excuse for it. So,
And we jumped on the bandwagon.
That's awesome.
Yeah. I think at that point, we're all listening to a lot of podcasts, and it felt like, it was a way to digest information that wasn't looking at an email or an article online. You could do it while you were exercising or walking your dog. So why not?
And Kate's really good at unintentionally selling things. She would probably say that she's the least I hate sales, I'm allergic to it, but she always comes to the group with a really good, not argument, but support of something. So when she brings something forward, you pretty quickly know it's going to be yeah, okay, I'm picking up what you're laying down. It's just, she's so thorough and thought out in everything that she does. But did you have a question in the back? Yeah.
If you don't mind, I really appreciate your approach. I always end up wondering, how is this going to make some money? I think that is your goal at some point. It's not an immediate goal, but it's a strategic goal. And so, are you ready to share what that will look like eventually? And thank you for doing it. And I have a second question I'm going to squeeze in. You talked about how most marketers talk about narrowing your market, your population. And I didn't hear how you narrowed it. I heard that you're approaching women. And I'm wondering, as a male, thinking about starting a new entrepreneurial venture, I'm envious, not jealous. I'm envious because it sounds like in Bozeman at least, there's lots of support for women. Not lots. There is support for women towards starting new ventures. I haven't seen anything similar to the Bozeman Professional Women, I think it's called, or your podcast or anything like that for men. And
I can share a couple with you that are online.
okay.
But
And the fact is that I don't. It's interesting that that's your population. It makes sense for you, but this is not a subject that is for women or men.
And I think if you listen to the podcast, our company name is very geared towards women, but the content, it is. I mean, it's written in a women's voice, but there's probably a lot of value that you would get out of it if you could get over the company name and just how the email copy.
Yeah, I'm good with
Then hop on board and you'll be stoked because there's a lot of value. But
I do like that you bring that up because there's a huge focus for women in education, young girls in education, and what's happening to the 7-year-old boys. You know, there's just a lot less focus. So I'm glad you brought that up, and I think my instinct is that there's less focus specifically on men because men have been driving business
Sure.
in the world for so long, so it's just kind of assumed.
Not all of us though.
Yes, right. So it's assumed, but it's a really good point because it's really shifting. And we don't want to create an even larger gap between the male-female workforce. That's definitely not our goal, and we've talked about that quite a bit. But starting out, we needed to narrow it to someone. And you're right, we haven't narrowed it yet because we were so stuck on how we were going to narrow it because our topics are broad and they really serve a lot of different people. And we have a lot of work to do. And some of the conversations we've even had lately are, how do we shift the content to be more focused in one direction? Or how do we maybe include more interviews? Right now it's 1 a month. This year we want to do 2 a month, you know, as they come out. But the content itself is either an interview, really conversational, almost like you're sitting in our mastermind meeting, or they're kind of how-tos, and we bucketed them that way, but we're still working on what are our listeners want the most, and we just study analytics. So that's the marketing part of it. And I'm sorry, Kate, you wanted to answer somebody, what was the first part of your question?
Monetization.
Oh, money, the real question. So there's a lot of things you can do. It really requires, for the most part, a pretty substantial email list, like 10,000 and above, and social media followers. At that point, you can start becoming an influencer for other products, or what's called affiliate marketing. So if you're helping sell someone's product, they give you a percentage of that sale. Amazon does it a lot. There's a lot of companies out there that do that. So that's one way to make money. Jen, do you want to talk to some of the other ones?
I think some of the things that we're excited about is partnering with individuals that have created courses that are relevant for our audience and what they're looking for. So we just did an interview with a gentleman that has created,
Yeah, you can
just kind of
It's coming out.
forecasting. But this individual has created really successful niche sites. One in which he just sold to the tune of $235,000. And so he shares his how-to, and he's created an affiliate course that we're going to hop on board and just believe very much in the thoroughness of his content and how to make that happen. Sharing that with our audience, but because I think what we've come to realize recently is that a lot of our audience is wanting to, like, money's the foundation of a lot of things, in that, you know, how do I make more money, or how do I leave this job so that, you know, I can be more independent. And so really kind of tapping into that and allowing our audience to explore different avenues is something that we're toying with. But also sponsorships. Right now we do have a heavy presence of Bozeman downloads or Montana downloads, but we are seeing trends like in the Midwest and even in Europe, and some of those numbers that are growing outside of just this region right now. So companies that want to advertise to those areas and going after sponsorships, I think, is a big focus for us for 2018.
So sponsorship would mean that someone would just give you a sort of a monthly retainer-like fee and
Basically an
Support.
advertised sponsorship. And so anybody that's trying to target our demographic, you know, we've already got it targeted down. So instead of going on TV, you could advertise on the podcast where it's, you know, 25 to 45-year-old women that are listening, and that's my target demographic. It's easier to spend money on that. Or local companies that have spent $3,000 at one evening's event for, you know, some table or what have you, where if we could get audio and do plugs on the podcast, maybe the dollar would stretch a little bit further on advertisement. So
We want to be really strategic about who we would partner with to
Yeah.
sponsor. I mean, it has to make sense. We don't want it to feel cheap and charming. and like we're just taking money. The other thing that is on the horizon is our own courses. So based on our backgrounds, we don't know when, time is a funny thing, but we do have some courses in mind, online courses that we want to bring to the world just to help educate. So that's part of the plan too. So we've got some stuff in the works, nothing is solid, and a lot of it really depends on growth, significant growth.
And you gave the example of another person who you've interviewed, who, you mentioned it was a man, right?
Yep.
So did he give you a fee? Did he pay you to, well, so how is, you said will be a source of revenue, a stream of revenue, is that you're going to advertise other people's courses. How do you imagine that turning into revenue?
So an affiliate course is one in which somebody creates the content and then they give that to other individuals to promote. And if we have somebody sign up for that course, then we get a kickback from him, from our audience signing up. So that's how the affiliates work with courses.
And having him on the podcast wasn't a plug for his course. It was really more about how do you make a big life shift and enter this tech online space when it's maybe not your background, and build this thing in 2 years and really generate revenue on your own. It was really, that was the conversation. But in talking with him, we are thinking about promoting his work. And so then we think about how does that fuel into the marketing? Is there a plug on each podcast for a month? What do the website landing pages need to look like that take people to his site? So we're chugging along trying to figure that out. But the most important part is we want our content to be real and not just selling to somebody else. We don't want it to sound like an infomercial. So it's a really funny fine line.
Yeah.
Did you approach him or did he approach you? How did that relationship start?
I came across him at the group 1 Million Cups here in town.
Oh,
He was showing up to that and just super intrigued by him, and had a couple of conversations, and then I signed up for his five-figure niche site, and took the course and was just like, oh my God, it's so thorough, so helpful, and because of that, I was blown away at the transition that he was able to make and how quickly he went from diving into something entirely new to having that level of success quickly out of the gate.
Years quicker. But
Yeah, here.
Everybody
We're
has
not
this
talking
idea
like
that the
6
online
months,
space
but-
is just a moneymaker. You just need to get into that online space, you'll be making money. But
But
it
still,
takes.
within like 6 months, he was talking about making about $2,000 supplement to his. I would take $2,000 a month supplement, like. Sure.
I think we're just gonna wrap it up there. Thank you about making time to wrap up.
Thank you for having us.